Welcome back to Nederburg in the heart of Paarl, and welcome back to the Sommelier Series. Now you can see behind me there is plenty of information on the history and heritage of the Nederburg brand that's been going since 1791, and in particular reference to 5 Nederburg wines that celebrate 5 iconic figures in the history of Nederburg. The 5 wines, the 5 people, the anchorman, Philippus Volvaert, one of my favorite Chenin Blancs at the moment. Philippus was the man who got the first title deed back in 1791, the original owner. Johann Grauer, a German brewer who'd studied winemaking, who came out from Germany in 1937 and bought the farm. His wife Ilse, the beautiful lady, she certainly was. She was actually born in South Africa, moved back to Germany, grew up there, and then returned to South Africa with her husband. Their son Johann, who was tragically killed in an aircraft accident in 1953. The young Airhawk, as his wine reflects. And the motorcycle marvel, Gunther Brosel, another German who was winemaker at Nederburg for 33 years. So as you can see, so much history and heritage to the Nederburg brand, and that leads appropriately into this week's sommelier, a man responsible for the wine at one of the largest hotel chains on the planet, and a hotel group that has got a rich history of supporting South African wine. Miguel Chan is the sommelier. He's group sommelier at Tsogo Sun, and Tsogo Sun for many years the largest buyers at what was the Nederburg auction, now the Fine and Rare Wine Auction, and that wine is purchased under Miguel's guidance and then disseminated across their properties around South Africa and beyond. Now Miguel is Mauritian, but he lives in South Africa, so an islander by birth, but very much South African at heart, and as you'll learn today as we meet him at the Santon Sun, a man with a great passion for wine and a wonderful story to tell. Welcome to the Santon Sun in the heart of Santon, sitting just above the bustle of morning traffic. Traffic I am thankfully no longer in, but fighting through it took a little bit out of my day, and so I'm replenishing it with a glass of wine with one of my favourite people in the wine industry. There is, amongst our army of top sommeliers around South Africa, a maverick Mauritian who headlines the list of top somms based up in Johannesburg, and it is with Miguel Chan from Mauritius. I'm having breakfast this morning. Miguel, good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you for having me on your show.
Not at all. It's great to have you on the Sommelier Series because we've crossed paths a lot over the last while. We've drunk a lot of wine together. We've celebrated a lot of wine together. And yet, and this is an indictment on me, my knowledge of the Miguel Chan story is actually very limited. Usually wine and then me attempting to speak very bad French to you, which you very politely nod and smile at and don't understand a word of. So how does a Mauritian come to be one of the most highly respected sommeliers in South Africa?
Oh, well, it's been a journey then. It's been a journey. I grew up in a family where my grandfather and my father was chef. So from an early age, I was running around kitchens and restaurants until I went to college. And food was always part of my upbringing, and wine also. And my grandmother always had wine on the table. In those days when I was growing up in the 80s, it was mostly French wines. I remember it was the Beaujolais, the Côte d'Ivoire, and the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It was always on the lunch table. And as a kid, I remember not to be left out. I always begged to have some of the wines that my grandmother was enjoying. And what she would do is she would pour me a glass, a little bit of wine, that much water in it, and I was the quietest kid and happiest around because I felt I was among the adults. Little did I know that 20 years later or so, I would actually decide to make wine my profession. So I went to the hotel school and studied food and beverage. And from there, I realized there was a shortage of sommeliers in Mauritius. We had a few French sommeliers working on the island top hotels, and I found it fascinating. That year was 1996, and I was like, great. I'm not going to follow the path of being a food and beverage manager. I'm going to try something different, risky. And all my colleagues and friends at the time said, no, you're mad. There is no such thing of sommeliers on the island, and forget about it. I said, no, I will stick to the plan. And a couple of months later, beginning of 1997, I visited South Africa for the first time as a student, hotel school student. I came down for a week. I was 20 years old at the time, And it was the first time in my life I saw a vine. I saw a vineyard. August 1997. It was winter here in South Africa. And it was fascinating. Driving from Cape Town Airport to Franschhoek, seeing the vines, it was the catalyst. I was like, I made the right call, and I'm going to study as hard as I can and see how far I could go into the field. And I spent the next 3 years, up to 2001, studying wines, reading as much as I could. In the meantime, found a job after graduation at one of the best hotels in Mauritius, the Royal Palm. And there we had a fascinating wine list from all the best country of Bordeaux, Burgundy, and the great ones of Germany. Very little South African wines in those days. And the rest is story. And I made my way through a few addresses around the island. And in 2003 came the opportunity to join the Cellars North in Constantia. The late Liz Magra asked me for an interview. I flew down for a weekend, got an interview, and eventually went back to Mauritius. Didn't hear anything for 6 months. And one morning got an email asking me would I like to join for the summer season. Didn't know anything about what summer season is, because when you work in Mauritius, you work the whole year round. There's no season. We are always busy in a way or another. And there I came. It was the first time in my life. I remember starting in Constantia on a rainy day in October 2003, looking at the back of Table Mountain. I was like, where's the beach? Where's the ocean? It is the weirdest setup to actually, it was kind of a shock to the whole system. But I was fortunate in a way that at the Cellars, they had one of the most in-depth wine lists in the Cape at the time. It was a reference of 800 different wines from the Cape. It was really innovative as a concept. And I was given, I was lucky, I would say, very lucky and fortunate. I was given carte blanche to look after the wine list, which I had the privilege to look after and manage for 6 years thereafter. And it was the way for me to actually really engage with the wine industry, getting to know the industry players. And also it was a time where there was a massive transformation, it's still happening today, of how the South African wine industry was changing.
How difficult was the transition from Mauritius, not in terms of that you'd spend most of your life in Mauritius in a swimming costume, because that's Mauritius, it's beautiful and palm trees and sand beaches, but the wine culture in Mauritius is still predominantly French. The South African wine I find when I'm over there, sadly, is often more of an entry level, especially at the resorts. You don't see a lot of the top-end South African wine celebrated as much as I would like. The move from a French wine culture to suddenly being immersed in South African wine, how difficult was that?
It was quite challenging initially, because obviously the culture of wine in Mauritius, as you say so well, it's predominantly French-centric, and as such the palate and the palate profile of the consumer looking for more elegant wine, less alcohol. It's all about elegance. It's all about freshness. And coming to South Africa, and in those days, I remember in the mid-2000s, the Cape was producing blockbuster wine. It was a time where they were trying to emulate Californian style, super ripe, super oaky. It was quite something where you had a glass, the wine was perfect, but it was hard to finish a bottle. And also the culture in South Africa, where 95% of the wine consumed was South African wine. So overnight, it was like, forget about the Bordeaux, the Rhone, the Burgundy, the Loire, and get to know the Stellenbosch, the Paul. Elgin started coming in those times. Swartland was not really there around 2004, 2005, except for one or two players. And it was an adjustment, and like anything else in life, and especially with wine, it's about understanding where and what they were doing, and the transition was pretty okay from there.
You'd moved from Mauritius over to Constantia, beautiful part of the world,
Yep.
A really nice introduction into South Africa, both working and lifestyle, I'm sure. But you now find yourself in this extraordinary job commanding a wine empire for Tsogo Sun. How did you move from a wine list of 800 to a portfolio of not quite 800 properties, but certainly a huge space to oversee?
Indeed, we may not have 800 properties, but we have over 80 wine lists to look after. And the transition was huge in a way that when I was approached by Tsogo Sun to join in 2009, thinking that making the move to Johannesburg is like, okay, it's another city in South Africa. Little did I realize that actually Johannesburg is totally different from Cape Town. The market the taste profile, the consumer. It's very much it's domestic driven here, local consumer. The taste profile is here. We have most consumer drinking Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc as white, Merlot as red, and the market have changed certainly, and obviously. Tsogo Sun, it's massive in terms of our footprint, in terms of the clientele profile. It's about understanding, and the role of a sommelier is not actually to have it's not to have a wine list that is a Miguel Chan wine list. It's about understanding what the market wants to drink, and what they're willing to afford. And from there on, it's easier to actually bring in a personal touch, a personal element to the wines itself. And and coupled with it, we've seen how the industry have changed, and it's changing for the good. We are seeing far much younger South African embracing wine, irrespective of the wine style, either it is a demi-sec bubbly or an unwooded Chardonnay or a light style natural wine, Shiraz or Syrah for that matter. The good thing is there is traction. There is dynamism out there, which was not there 10 years ago.
Is it possible to isolate one particular wine moment, be it a bottle, a celebration, something you've done within the greater sphere of wine, that you look back and think that has been the high point so far?
There has been a few great bottles which in my wildest dream I wouldn't have thought of, even had a taste of. However, I remember in my first job at the Royal Palm, it was in the year 2000, just graduated from the hotel school, and with a wine list that was 90% French, there was a bottle of Stellenbosch Cabernet, Siemensberg side from Kamenkop, 1997. And I remember opening that bottle, it was, wow, if this is what they are producing at the tip end of Africa. And I remember that night there was a couple of Bordeaux First Croft that was open for the same table. And the wine stood so well, the Kamenkop stood so well, and I was like, this is the future of the wine industry in the world.
There's a little auction that's been happening for a while down in the Cape. We used to know it as the Nederburg auction, now the Rare and Fine Wine auction. And I think that when they watch you walk through the door, they smile more than anybody else's arrival, because that's a space you've spent quite a bit of time at, and you pick up quite a bit of wine from that.
Indeed, it's Tsogo Sun participation at the wine auction scene started in 2014. It was all part of our strategy to bring the best of the Cape on our wine list, and it's something that is not really well known for big hotel chains across South Africa, where wine are taken seriously, because it's always been the domain of a small standalone restaurant where the owner is hands-on and do the wine selection. It's a perception that we wanted to change, which we changed, and the aim was to bring the best of the best. H wine, and the Cape Fine and Rare Wine auction, it's about having mature red wine, mature white wine on the list. It is a fact that the market in South Africa does not drink enough mature wines. 98% of the wines are enjoyed in their flush of youth. What I mean by that, 1 to 2 years for the whites, 1 to 5 years, possibly at a push for the reds. But there are a whole window of enjoyment, of pleasure out there to have from wines that have been matured properly. And this is a strategy that we brought on selected wine lists across the country to give the opportunity to our consumer to enjoy a great bottle of wine at virtually retail price. And it's something that no one has ever done either.
Now, there's a horrible statistic that 4 out of every 5 bottles of wine that will be bought today will be drunk today.
Wow.
And it's just makes me sad.
It
really.
It is a beverage that needs to be nurtured and drink when it's at its peak. And I guess it's how things are changing. Yeah.
Of course, such wine also needs good food, but before we head into a conversation on food and wine, which is another shared passion, I'm going to send you off to your kitchen.
Thank you.
And to your cellar,
Yeah.
which I believe is about the size of Malawi, the personal Miguel Chan cellar. I have no idea what you're going to bring to me. I know whatever it is, I'm going to be delighted. So
Thank you.
You head off, bring
Thank
back
you.
some magic.
Excellent.
Thanks, Miguel.
I shall be back.
So a little earlier, you will have heard Miguel before I dispatched him to his vast cellar and kitchen. about the wine that inspired him from South Africa, that 1997 Kanonkop Cabernet Sauvignon. And it sounded amazing. It certainly wasn't the wine I was expecting, and yet as I glance across your broad shoulders, Mr. Chan, that's exactly what you have.
Indeed, indeed. It's one of those wines where it really made me realize about the potential of South Africa back then. I just came out of hotel school, my first job, and I remember tasting the 1997 vintage alongside Bordeaux First Growth. And the wine was there, right there. It was not shying. It was fantastic and phenomenal. I was like, wow, if this is what they're making at the tip of Africa, certainly there are greatness coming out from the Cape.
What I'm often astounded with for some of our older reds, I drank some old cab, not as old as this, but some probably 12-year-old cab a few weeks ago, was just how fresh it still was. There was a stage where older South African wine, while still being eminently drinkable, had started to pick up that slightly metallic, slightly rusty.
Indeed.
You got a sense it was feeling its age.
Absolutely. Well, one have to remember 1997 was an exceptionally cool year. It was the first vintage where the industry realized that actually Cabernet was not being picked in February or beginning of March. It was actually picked in April. In fact, many wineries were picking right into May. Here, a South African Cabernet, 2 decades in the bottle, and this for me it shows the greatness of Cabernet in Stellenbosch, but the greatness of Cabernet in Simonsburg, and to have this alongside the very top Medoc First Growth, it will be impossible to differentiate from a 1997 vintage. How refined, how subtle, the nuances, the freshness, the tannin is still present, and most importantly, the fruit is still alive for a 23-year-old Cabernet. It's a purge egg, and then it's kind of a breakfasty kind of touch to it because of the Hollandaise sauce and the eggs and the belly. So it's all about savouriness there.
Something about pork belly that just cries out for wine, because there's that richness where you need the little bit of tannin to just cut through it.
Absolutely.
But then also a big mouthful of flavour with a big mouthful of Cabernet Sauvignon. This is an inspired selection, Monsieur Chan.
Thank you, Monsieur Nicole.
This might be your greatest moment ever as a sommelier.
Thank you, cheers.
Well, look, not just thank you for this, but thank you for adding such a rich dimension to our South African wine industry, as you not just have, but I've got to continue to do. What does the future hold for you for both South African wine and for Miguel Chan and Tsogo Sun?
Well, the future is bright, certainly for the wine industry and the hotel industry and for the wine side. And we are right there with the best, and it is such a fortunate time for all of us to be alive and to drink the greatness of the Cape.
Well, it's been a delight with you this morning. I look forward to many more glasses.
Thank you.
And let's put it in the diary. We'll see plenty of each other before then. But 5 years' time, try out that 97 Cabernet Sauvignon again.
It will be lovely. Cheers. Thank you.
There we go. The island of Mauritius, it's celebrated for its beaches, for its textiles, for its holidays, for its sense of adventure. But I reckon the single greatest export Mauritius can lay claim to is a sommelier called Miguel. Cheers.